Hi, my name's Leanna. We're at the School of Artisan Food today and we're making some burgers with hidden vegetables. We're first going to start by making our bread dough. We're going to make a wholemeal bread, wholemeal and plain white flour bread dough, so it's a mixture of the two. So it's about a 50-50 mix of a wholemeal and a white flour mix. These are both bread flours, which means they've got more protein in. But what we are going to do with them is we're going to mix them together because it gives a nice texture, but then you also get an added bit of fibre from the wholemeal flour. So to begin with, I'm going to add 125 grams of my wholemeal flour into a large bowl. And then to add it to that, I'm going to add in the same amount, 125 of my white bread flour. The protein in flour is called gluten, and this, when mixed with water, makes the structure of the bread. So that's my flour in. Now I need to add my yeast in. I need 4 grams of yeast. I'm using dried yeast here, which is dried fast action yeast. You can use lots of different forms of yeast. Some of them need different ways of preparing them. So this one can go straight into the flour. Some you have to activate with water first. So with that, on the other side, I'm also going to add 3 grams of salt. Salt's really important because it helps strengthen the gluten and it adds flavour. So that goes into there. Then finally, I'm going to add some warm water. So the water is about the same temperature as your hands, not too warm, because then you'll kill your yeast. So into there, I'm going to add about 200 grams of my warm water. When we add it in, if you're nervous about it, you can add it a little bit at a time. So you could add 100 grams first and then add a bit more if you wanted. It just depends on what you feel most comfortable with. So that goes into there. Then I'm going to take it off my scales and I'm going to start to mix. Now I have got some more water. If I feel like it's a bit dry, I can always add a little bit more water. So what I'm going to do is use my hand as like a claw. So if you see the mixture there, I'm just going to mix it together, and all I'm going to do at this initial stage is get it together as a dough. So not going to worry too much about what it looks like. It doesn't really matter if it's not completely all together. So if you've got a little bit of wet or a little bit of dry in the bottom, it doesn't really matter. But you should have this sort of partially sticky dough. Now you can make this bread dough with just white flour or just wholemeal flour. It would have the same effect. If you're just using wholemeal flour, you may have to use a tiny bit more water, but what you want is this nice sticky mixture. What I'm going to do now is just put it to one side for 10 minutes to allow the dough to rest, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to start by doing a pull and fold kneading method, which I'll show you in a minute. This is now left for 10 minutes now, so I can come back to my dough. And all I'm going to do is what's called a pull and fold method to knead it. It's quite unlabour intensive. It's not all that kneading that you often see on cookery programmes. So all you have to do is you grab some of the dough and then you stretch it and you pull it in. So you grab and push it back in. And you just do that 10 times. Don't worry if you miscount, it doesn't matter if you do it 9 times or 11 times or even 15 times, it doesn't really matter. But around about 10 times, and as you do it, you should see the tension in the dough get a little bit stiffer, so it gets harder to pull, and that's absolutely fine. Now I've completely lost count, I think that's about 7. So 8, 9 and 10. And then what you should have is this nice firm ball of dough. So once I've done that, I'm going to now put that to one side to rest again, but this time for a little bit longer. So I'm going to rest this for 20 minutes and I'm going to repeat that process again. and then I'm going to allow it to rest for a further hour. Once I've done that, I'll show you how to shape it to ready for baking, and then I'll also show you how to do the burgers as well. I'm going to carry on with my burgers now, and I'm going to make the actual meat patties. Now you can swap if you didn't want to use meat. I'm using a turkey mince, but you can use chickpeas if you wanted, which will give you a similar effect for a vegetarian version. You can obviously use beef mince as well, but we are in the government guidelines with the Eat Well guide, we try and eat less red meat. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with prepping our vegetables, because there's something sneaky about these burgers. They have extra vegetables in, but you won't be able to, hopefully, won't be able to taste them too much. So the first vegetable we're going to use is an onion. Now this really is primarily for flavour, but it does have some good things in it as well, which will keep you healthy, some good nutrients. So I'm going to start off. Now you do have to grate the onion, which might well make you cry, but don't worry about it, it's perfectly fine. Just if your eyes really water, just take a step back and blink loads. What you don't want to do is be trying to grate it and not look, because you're much more likely to grate your hand then, and that would be very painful. So I've just got half an onion here, and I'm only going to grate around about a quarter of my onion. I'm going to keep the rest for a future recipe. Along with my onion, I'm going to grate some courgette. Again, you don't have to use courgette, but it gives it extra vitamins, and it also bulks out the recipe. So you don't have to use as much meat, which is expensive, and we also all should be trying to eat more of our fruit and veg, so it adds to your 5 a day. So once I've grated my courgette, I've also got a carrot. Now you can peel your carrot. So all I'm going to cut off is the bottom. And just using the peeler, I'm just going to grate away from myself, peeling off my skin. Again, you don't have to peel your carrot skin, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes if they're slightly older carrots, it makes it a little bit hard to peel. So with my hand on top of there, I'm going to keep this nub on so I don't grate my hand. And I'm just going to grate the carrot in as well. Be really careful when you're grating that you're paying real close attention to what you're doing so you don't grate your fingers. Then I'm going to turn my grate around now, and I'm just going to use the smaller side. You don't have to use the smaller side of a grater. You could use a garlic press, or you could just chop it finely. I've got a garlic clove. I'm just going to lean on it. Should have heard it click then. And then I can just easily then peel back my skin from my garlic clove, so you get the clove without the skin. I'm just going to use the garlic press here, the other side of my grater, just to grate my garlic. Again, this is really tiny, so be very, very careful with your fingers. If you're more comfortable, use a garlic press or just chop it really, really finely. So once I've grated my garlic, I'm then going to take everything out of the inside. You will see inside the grater a lot of my vegetables and things are stuck. So it is absolutely fine to reach your hand in and scoop it out. Just be aware, when you reach in, don't press too hard so you press your fingers through the blade. It's also absolutely fine to push your hand down this way across the grater, never the other way. You don't want to grate your hand. So once I've put my all my veg, I've got my turkey mince in my bowl. I'm going to add to that my grated veg, and I'm going to add in there a good amount of salt, and I've got some oregano. So I'm also going to add about half a stock cube. This will just add a nice background flavour. It's really important if you're using chickpeas rather than mince. So if you're using the chickpeas, what you'd need to do is drain the can of chickpeas, then mash them, and then add them in. And you might need to use a bit more of the stock cube because just to add the extra flavour. So I'm going to add into there about a teaspoon of oregano and about half a teaspoon of some salt. Your stock cube is quite salty, so don't go overboard on your salt. So once all that's in there, what I need to be aware of now is I need to make sure that I've prepped my baking tray, that it's all going on, which I'm just going to do. I've just put some grease proof on there, and I'm just going to put a little bit of oil down just to help my burgers start to cook. But once I've touched my raw meat, I don't want to touch anything else. That's really important because we do not want to spread raw meat bacteria to any of my surfaces or anything else around me. When I've got raw meat on my hands, the next thing I need to do is wash them before I do anything like put them in the oven or anything like that. So what I'm going to do then is get my hands now into my mixture and start to squeeze it all together. Now what you might find is if it's a bit not sticking together, you might need to add a bit of breadcrumbs in. If it's a bit, especially if your mince has been frozen or you've added loads of veg in, it might not stick together. If that's the case, just add a couple of tablespoons of either breadcrumbs or flour, and that will bring it together so that it should stick together, as mine is doing okay, so it should be absolutely fine not to have any breadcrumbs in like that. Okay. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make 4 reasonably large burgers with this. So I'm going to split my mixture into approximately 4 pieces. And then I'm going to use my hands just to shape them into a burger patty. What will happen is in the oven, they will shrink. So they'll contract because they're a muscle. And when you put energy on them, the muscle will contract, which means that they'll end up probably smaller than you want them. So think about making them at least about 1 centimetre bigger than you want them to go onto your tray. So once I've shaped them into my shape, and then pop them on the tray, and that's going to go into the oven to cook. So I'm going to carry on, do my other ones, and then I'm going to cook them for about 10 minutes on each side. Once I've done that, I'll show you how to do the burger buns and how to put them all together. To go with my burgers, I'm going to make a quick tomato relish. You don't have to add this, but it just adds a really nice pop of flavour into your burgers. I've got my onion that I didn't use the whole of before, so I'm going to use that up, and all I'm going to do is chop it really, really fine. So I'm just chopping right down the onion into really nice thin slices, and then I'm going to do exactly the same and chop the other way just to get nice, really small pieces of onion. So once I've got my onion, I'm then going to add, I've got some tomatoes and some garlic. You don't have to use tomatoes. There's lots and lots of different things you can make a quick pickle with. You could even use pears or apples, whatever you have. If it's anything that's going just a little bit soft, this would be a really good thing to use things up for. So with my tomatoes, I'm just going to chop those into halves and then into, again, small diced pieces, not too big, because I don't want my relish to have really chunky pieces in, but I also don't want it to be completely mashed up, so I want it to have a little bit of texture in. So once I've diced my tomatoes, I'm going to add some different flavours in as well. Into my pickle, I'm going to need some salt, some sugar, some balsamic vinegar, or other types of vinegar. It doesn't really matter on your vinegar choice. It will just add a slightly different texture. And I'm going to add some oregano, but again, it depends on what type of pickle, type of quick pickle you want to make. So this isn't something that would last a long time because we're not putting a really high percentage of vinegar in, but it just gives a really nice flavour. So with my garlic, I've just crushed the outside just as we did before, and I'm just going to chop this really, really finely. When you're chopping garlic really fine, especially if you're using what's called a paring knife, which I am, which is a really small vegetable knife, just be really careful because it is super easy to chop into your fingers. So just take your time, watch what you're doing, and I'm just going to chop it really nice and small to mix into my pickle. In my saucepan, I'm going to put about a tablespoon of oil, and then I'm going to add all my veg in at the same, well, tomatoes are fruit, but I'm going to add that in as well, in at the same time. And then I'm going to start that cooking, and I'm going to add in my sugar. About a tablespoon of that goes in there. I'm going to add my oregano, which is about a teaspoonful, just something to give it flavour. You could use basil or most other herbs. I'm going to add a good pinch, or about a quarter of a teaspoon of salt, and about a tablespoon of the vinegar. Then I'm going to turn that down to what we call a simmer, which basically means just below the boil. So you can still see it bubbling a bit, but it's not bubbling ferociously. And I'm just going to leave that simmer for about 20 minutes to half an hour till it's really reduced down. And that'll be a really nice sauce to spread onto my burger buns. The next step with my burger buns is to prep my dough. So this has been rising, it's been risen for about an hour, and you can see that it's nice and puffed up. It's got a lot of air in it. So all I'm going to do now is take the dough scraper and take it out of the bowl. Don't worry if it's a little bit sticky, that's absolutely fine. Then I'm just going to shape it into my burger buns now. So I'm going to start off by just chopping it into 4 pieces. Now if it is a little bit sticky, you can either put a little bit of flour down, but try and avoid putting too much flour on your dough, because the more flour you put on, you'll just make it not taste quite as nice. So all I'm doing now is prepping it into approximately 4 even pieces. You could do more, you could do fewer, it depends on how big burger buns you want. So once I've got my dough pieces, all I'm going to do then is take the outside of them and fold them into the centre. So I'm moving round my burgers dough and folding it in, just creating a little bit of tension. Then I pick it up and roll it in my, getting away from me, rolling it in my hands till I get a nice bun shape. So what I'm doing is using the palm of my hand and dragging it across like that, and that'll get this nice tight bun shape. Then once I've done that, I can place it onto my baking tray and do the same with all of the others. Then these should bake for around about 20 to 25 minutes on about 200. One thing you can do, especially with bread dough, to get a really nice crusty top on them, if you put a tray of water in the bottom of your oven, that'll allow some steam to be created, which will create a really nice crunchy top. So just into your oven, just in the bottom of your oven, and that'll create the steam. Then these are going to bake, and then once these are done, I'll put it all together. Just to finish off my burgers now, I'm going to put everything together. So my buns have come out of the oven. They've cooled down slightly so I can pick them up, so I'm not going to burn myself. One of the ways you can make sure that they're done is if you just tap it, it should sound hollow, so you shouldn't be able to hear a big clonking noise. Then if you cut it open, it should have a nice texture that when you push it down, it doesn't stay down, it pops straight back up. And that's how you know your bread is definitely cooked in the middle. So I'm going to take my bun now, and then I've got some of my quick pickle, which is my tomato relish. So I'll put some of that on at the bottom. I've got my burgers, so I'm going to put one of those on. Then I've got a little bit of lettuce, so I'm just going to slice that up, add a bit of lettuce on. You don't have to put the lettuce on, you don't have to put anything on, it's up to you. I've got some tomato, so if I just take the bottom off, and then I'm just going to put a couple of nice thin slices of tomato onto the top as well. Then add my bun top, and there we have our hidden, well, not completely hidden, but slightly hidden vegetable turkey burgers in our half and half wholemeal and plain white flour buns.